Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this exciting session on Chronicles in the Primary Classroom, the power of storytelling in history. My name is Nicolette DSilva, and I'm thrilled to be your host for this masterclass where the past meets imagination. But before we begin, let me take you through a few important guidelines for today's session. Remember to keep your mics muted. Feel free to use the chat box to share your opinions, your ideas, and participate in today's discussion. Together, let's create a positive learning environment. Now, a little insight about myself. I'm currently based in the UAE and I'm a primary educator specializing in grades 3 and 4. I was recently honored with the prestigious Yalla School Award and the Blue Ribbon Award for Excellence in Teaching. Along with being a teacher, I'm also the events coordinator and well-being coordinator for my grade, where I actively organize school events, inter-house competitions, and student engagement initiatives. I'm currently pursuing my master's in education from ITU. Beyond my call as a teacher, I'm also collaborating with Emirates Nature WWF, where I explore UAE's rich biodiversity, learn about their environmental concerns, and integrate my learning into the curriculum to nurture environmentally conscious students. My teaching ethos moves beyond the textbooks. I believe in creating and engaging a meaningful learning environment for my students where every student feels loved, valued, and motivated to excel. So let's begin with today's masterclass. Now, let me ask you, how many of you have had your students, or in fact, you yourselves, groan at the mention of a history class? Well, we've all been there, right? But what if we told our students that history is just not about memorizing facts and details? What if you turned your history class into an adventure where students just don't learn about the past, but live it through storytelling? So, by today's master's class, you are going to be able to explain the significance of storytelling in making history an engaging and memorable class, to identify how the brain processes stories and how they aid in retention, to examine the different AI tools that help create immersive stories in history, to design story based lesson plans that enhance the retention of key historical events. So, are you ready to explore the magic of storytelling in history? Let's begin. Now, imagine yourselves as all students in my history class. I'm going to narrate the same historical event to you, but in two different ways. I want you to pay close attention at which version has attracted your attention the most. Please feel free to use the chat box to express your choice. So let's begin with the first version. In 1773, a group of American colonists protesting against British taxation boarded ships in the Boston harbor and threw 342 chests of tea into water. This act of defiance, known as the Boston Tea Party, escalated tensions between Britain and the colonies, leading to the American Revolution. Now it's time for the second version. A cold December night. The Boston harbor is still. Suddenly, a group of men disguised as Mohawk warriors creep onto the British ships. Whispering to each other, they pry open wooden crates and with a mighty heave, they toss the tea into the dark waters below. The splash echoes into the night, a symbol of rebellion, a spark that would set a revolution ablaze. Now, I would like you all to tell me, which version did you find more engaging? Was it the first version that only detailed the facts? or the second version that used a storytelling approach? Please let me know in the chat box. So Miss Anjali says version 2, Miss Zainab said version 2, Miss Shanti also has agreed to version 2. That's exactly what storytelling does. It turns dry facts into immersive experiences. So let's begin with a poll. On your screens, you will all find a poll. Which of these do you find the most effective in teaching history? Do you think it's facts and data? Do you think it is logical explanations? Or do you think it is storytelling and real life examples? Well, we all agree. Storytelling and real life examples is one of the best methods I would recommend in learning history. Why? Because stories remain in your minds for much longer. While going through this, or when researching about this topic, came across a famous Native American proverb that stated, "Tell me the truth and I learn. Tell me the facts and I learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will remain in my heart forever." Now imagine teaching students about a topic like perseverance. You simply state facts about determination, give them tips about how to work hard. But have you thought about using a story? Maybe tell them a story of Thomas Edison, who failed about 1,000 times before inventing the light bulb. Or share the journey of J.K. Rowling, who faced multiple rejections before Harry Potter even became a global success. Storytelling isn't just about making lessons fun. It taps into curiosity, it taps into your emotions, it taps into your imagination. It helps students connect with the historical event rather than just memorizing the dates and facts, which can, in fact, can be very boring. Storytelling is just like, it functions like a jigsaw puzzle, where every piece of the puzzle represents a figure in history, a concept, an event. And just as a puzzle is incomplete without all the pieces together, similarly, history is best understood when its events are woven together in a comprehensible narrative. As a child, my history teacher told me stories about the great medieval warriors. And that is what helped me remember the events, the flow of the events, the timeline in my mind. But apart from, if we say storytelling is an effective way of teaching history, but is storytelling the only method, or do you have forms of storytelling? What do you feel? Which are the different forms of storytelling? Do you all know any guesses? A hint for you, maybe a fable. What else would you say? Okay, let's go into detail about this. There are 6 forms of storytelling. You have the fable, a myth, a folk tale, an epic, an anecdote, and a legend. So, if you want to teach your students about, let's say, how small countries have an impact on global politics or the global economy, which method or which form of storytelling would you use? I would suggest a fable. Now, you must be wondering, how can you use a fable to narrate this or to connect the dots? Let me tell you, why not use the famous Aesop fable of the lion and the mouse? And this is the best and the most simplest way you can make your young learners, and we're talking about primary grade learners, understand how small actions have a big impact on the global nation. You could also use a legend to explain how civilizations came into being. For example, the famous legend of Romulus and Remus and how Rome was founded. Now, let's understand a little more in detail why storytelling is the most powerful method, but yet underestimated method of learning history.
The power of story in teaching. An ancient Indian proverb says, "Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." The power of story is immense. If you think of your favorite movie, novel, those stories remain in us forever. They teach us many wonderful things and move us deeply. The beauty of story is that we often get so engaged in the story that we don't often notice the learning that is occurring beneath the surface. There are many ways to use stories in teaching. Stories can be told by the teacher or by the students. It is an experiential, constructivist learning process, often in the affective learning domain of Bloom's taxonomy, and is commonly used in transformative education. Jerome Bruner, a cognitive psychologist and researcher, found that stories provide an essential element to the learning process because it makes meaning through experience. Some of the pros of using story in teaching are that a story tends to have more depth than a single example. It really helps students to connect the dots from theory to the real world. It encourages listeners to reflect on their own personal stories and learn from others' mistakes. It brings knowledge and information to life. As the information is gauged with more deeply, more meaning is extracted, making the power of story.
Well, sorry if there was a technical glitch in that. However, let me summarize this for you. Like the video just now told us, storytelling enhances engagement and interest, and it transforms historical facts into something very relatable for students to understand. So, for example, rather than just listing about the Titanic sinking in 1912, why don't you tell your students a narrative about, from the point of view of a third class passenger or a rich person or even a crew member? This would help the students connect to the event and make it more relatable for them to understand. Storytelling improves retention and comprehension. This is because even research has proven that our brains are naturally structured to understand, to engage, and to comprehend stories, making historical events even easier to remember. The next point, storytelling, one of the best methods, or the most important benefits of storytelling is that you can tell a story from multiple perspectives. And you can also encourage students to use their critical thinking skills to analyze different viewpoints, the biases, and the motives behind historical events. So you're not only engaging your students to critically think, but you're also building an emotional connect. You're also fostering critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, as well as teaching them to empathize with the people in that scene. Storytelling makes history more inclusive and culturally diverse by amplifying the marginalized voices and uncovering hidden histories beyond dominant narratives. Now, we all may agree, or most of us may agree, that our current curriculum, or even educators for that fact, we focus on dates, on facts, and give very little importance to the other perspective. But through history, you can also use the margin. You can also tell a history from the perspective of the marginalized people, the slaves, the weaker class in society. This way, you are also giving a holistic view of history and rather than focusing on a single perspective. Storytelling strengthens empathy and emotional connect by allowing students to experience history from the eyes of real people and their struggles. So, for example, instead of teaching students about the World War through facts and statistics, maybe read a narrative from Annie Frank's personal diary. This way, students would be able to empathize with her. They would be able to experience what she experienced visually through her fear of persecution, maybe her dream of a better future. Students begin to live in the scene. They begin to visualize the event as if they were actually present there. And finally, storytelling helps to bridge the past to the present by drawing connections between historical events and modern day issues, making history more relevant to students' lives. Through storytelling, students can explore the past. They can understand what is its impact on the present, and this can help them shape their decisions for a better future tomorrow. With this, we have achieved our first objective, which was to explain the significance of storytelling in making history engaging and memorable. Now, let's play a quick game. On your screen, there are a few words. I'm giving you 10 seconds to memorize as many words as you can. So you have apple, train, blue, happiness, ladder, sharp, river, loud, glass, tiger, and coat. Well, now I would like you to use the chat box and tell me how many words can you recollect now? Okay, Miss Nelsita can connect only one. Anybody else? Okay. How many words can you? You can put it all together in one. Is there anyone who can recollect more than 4 words or 5 words? Miss Catherine, excellent. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to read out a story to you. Fine. A tiger was drinking from a river when it saw a glass bottle floating. Curious, it climbed up a ladder onto a train. A man in blue coat saw the tiger and shouted loudly in happiness. He always wanted to see one. Now tell me, how many of you can remember more number of words than you could in the first try? Please feel free to use the chat box to express your opinions. Okay, so Miss Anita can now recollect 7 words. Beautiful. Miss Nelsita said 8 words. Miss Shanti as well said 8 words. Now, what was the purpose of doing this quick memory test with you all? Students remember facts. They remember words, but only temporarily. But if you tell them a story, it creates a flow in their mind. They are able to remember, they're able to retain more details when you tell them through a story. So, unlike plain facts, which activates only the language processing centers of the brain, you have storytelling that activates multiple parts of the brain. And that is what we are going to be looking at in this segment. But before we begin, I want to ask you, why do stories enhance comprehension and retention compared to raw facts? Is it because they activate multiple areas of the brain? Or because they make learning more difficult? Or option C, they bypass the brain's memory processing centers. Or option D, they only engage the language processing areas of the brain. Please use the chat box to respond to this question. Okay, option A, Miss Priya and Miss Shilpa as well as Miss Anita says option A. Wonderful. So we all agree when you listen to a story, it activates not only your language processing part of the brain, but also the auditory, the memory, the visual cortex of the brain. Apart from activating different parts of the brain, it also helps release different hormones like oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, that is integral in building curiosity, engagement, and interest in learning. Now, I want you all to carefully listen to me. These words that I just now used, dopamine, cortisol, let's take for example neural coupling. All these seem Greek to me at first. Most of us, in fact, may find it difficult to understand what these terms are. But since we are looking at what impact does storytelling have on the brain, I would like you to listen very carefully to what I'm going to say now. I want you all to close your eyes. Let's go back in time. Imagine we are in 1963, Washington, D.C. A man stands in front of a massive crowd and says, I have a dream. With those words, Martin Luther just doesn't speak. He paints a picture in the people's mind. And in that moment, millions of minds are synchronized. Millions are sharing his vision. This is exactly what neural coupling is. It helps the listener, it helps the brain connects to the listener as well as the speaker. It draws a connection. It helps the listener understand or visualize what the speaker is actually trying to convey. So the student may not be physically present, but can visualize what is happening in that historical event. So next time, try this in your class. Instead of explaining about the Industrial Revolution with mere facts, tell a story of young Hannah, for instance, who starts her day before sunrise, working long hours without much pay. Students will then step inside her shoes and their brains will mirror Anna's emotions, making the lessons less forgetful. Now close your eyes once more. Fast forward to the 1940s. A Jewish girl named Annie Frank sits in her secret annex. She's writing down her thoughts in her diary. Decades later, millions of readers like us feel connected to what she went through. This is exactly what oxytocin does. It helps build trust and empathy. It is released when we are emotionally invested in the story, making us care about the people in that story. That is why students are able to deeply understand and relate to stories rather than just facts and dates. Now imagine you're an explorer. You are gone into the unknown waters trying to discover something new. Now, what happens next? This is what dopamine does. It builds curiosity in the listener. It improves attention, motivation, and memory, which is all essential in student engagement. Yes, Miss Dina, you raised your hand. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask your doubts or to share your opinions. Now let's remember that dopamine improves attention. It improves your retention. But if a lesson is dull, remember the dopamine levels also will reduce. And that means student engagement is also lessened. So next time, start your lesson with a mystery. This will keep your students engaged, will keep them curious. They will want to know what happens next. Next, we have the cortisol. The Great Depression, for example, imagine losing everything. You're part of the Great Depression. Imagine losing everything. You are standing in soup kitchen lines, waiting for a meal. Children are selling newspapers for pennies. Some are left homeless. How do you feel? You may be feeling tensed. You may be feeling stressed out. That is what cortisol does. It is released during the moments of tension, stress, or suspense. And finally, I want you to imagine yourself standing in ancient Egypt. You're standing before the pyramids, and a scribe hands over a scroll to you. You open that scroll and you start revealing the message from the pharaoh. This is what mirroring does. It helps you experience the story as if you were part of the story. So, when students hear stories about bravery, struggles, or victories, they emotionally mirror what they experience. So, try this in class. Why not use role play? Let students become revolutionaries, let them become explorers or leaders, and experience the history rather than just memorizing it. This will help make your lessons less forgetful, but more meaningful and more memorable. Now, let me ask you one thing if you have noticed. What did I just now use to explain all these key terms or all these hormones to you? I used short narratives to help you understand how the release of hormones affects the brain, how it helps make the story, how it impacts the brain. That is what storytelling does. It makes complex facts into more comprehensible and relatable details. Thank you, Miss Dina. Thank you, Miss Nelzita, for your. And with this, we have achieved our second objective to identify how the brain processes and how they aid in retention. So, next time in your social studies lesson, are you simply going to state the facts which will go above the students' heads? Or are you going to let them into an immersive experience where they are able to visualize the event, although they were not part of the event? Now, let's understand how storytelling caters to differentiation. Which learning style do you think storytelling caters to? Does it cater to only the visual learners? Does it cater to only the kinesthetic learners? Does it cater to only the auditory learners? Please use the chat box and let me know. Which learning style does storytelling cater to? Once again, I repeat, is it only the auditory learners? Does it cater to only the visual learners or only the kinesthetic learners? Well said, Mr. Betty and Shilpa Kamath. Okay, Miss Meena, Miss Ritu, Miss Shanti, all of us agree that it caters to all the different learning styles. So why not use it then in our history classes? Storytelling caters to different types of learners, whether it's the visual or auditory or kinesthetic learners. For instance, even the higher ability learners or even those students who find it difficult to comprehend complex facts, just like me. I would prefer understanding a historical event through a story rather than just understanding those random dates, who fought which battle, which country entered the world war. That would all be mind boggling. But understanding the same event through a historical narrative would be a much simpler, a much comprehensible matter for me to understand. So, storytelling holds the key to overcoming challenges we face in our classrooms to make our lessons more interesting, engaging, and memorable for our students. It helps us make learning more relevant and personalized for every learner. It also helps us in scaffolding difficult concepts. History involves a lot of complex ideas, and we all will agree. Imagine explaining about revolutions to a grade 2 and grade 3 learner. Imagine explaining about economic systems to a grade 4 learner. Imagine explaining about political ideologies. This will all be confusing for them. But storytelling helps to break down the same concepts into manageable parts, into simple and digestible, relatable facts for them to learn. Storytelling also fosters social and emotional learning. When students hear or read about people from different backgrounds, they step in someone else's shoes. They learn to empathize with what that person has gone through. And finally, it also facilitates formative assessment. You can use storytelling as a means of formative assessment. Who said no? And that's something we are going to be learning and going through by the end of today's masterclass. So let's see what are the different ways. Oh, sorry. With this, we have achieved our third objective, which is to examine storytelling as a method of differentiation in the classroom. Now, let's understand what are the different ways you can incorporate storytelling in a lesson. The first, the fun and the most interesting way you can engage a class, whether a small class or a large class strength, is a role play. Put them into groups, assign them a historical event, let them research about it, and explore this entire event through a storytelling. The second one would be a first person narrative. Imagine yourself entering the class as a leader or a student entering, beginning your class about, let's say, the great in War of Independence, entering as Mahatma Gandhi and narrating about this Dandi March. This would not only build their curiosity, but would also help them engage in the lesson. So you use first person narratives. For a visual learner, or for those who would like to, who need information to be scaffolded, use a story map and a timeline. This would help them organize the information in a chronological order as well as understand better the flow of events. One method I feel is the most interesting and what primary learners would love is artifact based learning. Get in class a piece of coal from a factory, or a wooden shoe, or maybe an old clock, or let's say a piece of fabric. Get students to understand the meaning of every artifact. Let them research about it and build a story. This way, you are engaging students to use their critical thinking skills. You're engaging them to research and to be actively involved in the learning process. And finally, who wouldn't like a little bit of mystery? So, a little bit of mystery is always the best way to create excitement in your class. Give your students an opportunity to put on their detective hats and to solve the clues through problem solving based on a storytelling approach. This way, they will be able to decode why certain civilizations declined or why did certain revolutions even fail. Now, there are certain AI tools that can be your best friend when weaving stories into interesting narratives by helping you to teletransport yourselves back to the past. And this not only helps them remember it better, but also fascinates them and educates them at the same time. So, here are a few tools that will help you to create immersive experiences for your students. The first one is Pixton. Then you have the Canva storyboard, you have Animator, you have Powtoon, you have ChatGPT, and finally you have Scratch. Now, what's the best part of all these tools? All these tools are free of cost. You can access them. Obviously, there are certain features that come at a price. However, the best features are available to you for free. So use these tools to create immersive experiences for your students, to use the storytelling method to create a visual impact on your learners. So let's take a quick look at how we can use ChatGPT to create a ready-made narrative for all of us. So considering the time, I have already used a prompt in ChatGPT. So for example, on your screens, you can see I have written the command, write a monologue from the perspective of a Stone Age man, highlighting his role as a hunter and a gatherer. Focus on his daily life, challenges, and skills required to survive during this time. Now, this monologue must cater to the grade 3 students. If you see, ChatGPT has used this command to not only give an exciting narrative for the students, but the language used as well is very simple for them to understand. What I would like you all to do is why don't you use ChatGPT and find out a narrative of your choice based on a history lesson or based on a historical event of your choice. Now, moving on, we have achieved our fourth objective as well, which is to examine the different AI tools that create immersive stories in history. Now, finally, the most important objective, how can we incorporate storytelling in our lesson plans? How many of you all say that we can incorporate storytelling only in the starter or in the methodology? What do you feel? Where can storytelling best fit in? Please use the chat box. Let me know. Do you think storytelling should be used as a starter? Should it be used in the methodology? How about using it in any other part of the lesson? Miss Dina says in any part of the lesson. What else? Okay, Miss Nazita says in the starter. Miss Shilpa as well agrees that in any part of the lesson you could agree. Okay, wonderful. Some of you all says, including the plenary. Wonderful. Miss Shilpa, would you like to give me an example on how can you use it in the plenary? Miss Bhavni agrees that it can be used as a starter. I totally agree with you. Why not use storytelling to build interest in your learners? If your students come to know that you are teaching them something related to ancient history, they would automatically zone off. But what if you used a story and build your entire lesson around that story? That way, your students are glued to your lesson. They will love your history classes. So let's see now, how can we incorporate storytelling in our lesson plans? I have used the example, or let's say the event of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the first, as a starter, you can use it by through a narrative. For example, give two narratives. One from the point of view of, let's say, as given in the example, from a farmer's son in 1750 in England working on the land. And the second narrative, a factory worker's son in 1850 working in a textile mill. So you can give two different narratives, or maybe say two different perspectives, and ask students, follow that with a discussion in your class. How are their lives different? What made it so different? Which one, according to you, is harder? What are the major changes you have noticed? This way, you are setting pace for your entire lesson. You are building their curiosity. You are engaging them. You're ensuring that every student is actively participating in the class. Another interesting way of having storytelling in your starters is with who am I? Enter the class all dressed up, maybe as an explorer, maybe as an ancient merchant. Enter dressed up. Start your narrative as a monologue. Students will be immediately engrossed in your lesson. They would want to know who you are. So that's a fun way of starting your lesson. Another fun way would be history in a bag. This is similar to artifact based storytelling. Introduce your lesson by taking out artifacts from a bag. With every artifact that you remove, weave a story around it. This way, students are encouraged to connect the dots. And finally, time travel adventure. Transport your students to the ancient times or maybe to recent happenings. Let them understand, let them connect with what has happened, let them visualize the event. This way, you are helping them understand, you are helping build their foundation in that concept. Now, how can we use it in the methodology? Often we think that documentaries or videos or movies are the only options that you can incorporate storytelling in your lessons. However, how about weaving your lesson around a virtual museum tour? Use Google for that fact. Google Arts and Culture offers you a lot of resources. Use them to build your story. Students will not only experience it, they will not be able to see the artifact in real, but they will also understand better what has happened in that age. You can also use storytelling in exit tickets. Ask students, ask your uh, extreme spatial learners to write a diary entry on what they have learned. Maybe they could write a diary entry from a person's perspective in that historical age. For example, let them write from the perspective of a Stone Age man. What was the challenges they faced? How do they overcome those challenges? You could also use storytelling in your exit ticket by asking them to rewrite what they have learned in one sentence. Allow them to have fun in class. So why not use emojis to retell the same story? For your gifted and talented learners, encourage them to explore beyond. Ask them, what would happen if? Use that question. What would happen if this revolution continued? What would happen if this did not happen? Let them use their research skills. Let them use their critical thinking skills and understand and reflect on what would happen, on how the story would continue. You could also use, like we discussed earlier, storytelling as a form of your assessments. Why stick to the same paper pencil tests when we have all agreed that every learner is unique? Every learner is unique. We differentiate our lessons in the classroom, but why aren't we differentiating our forms of assessments? Encourage students to maybe have a podcast or design a comic strip or a visual story map. Encourage your students to have fun in class by enacting a historical event through a role play. This way, students are engaged in your lesson, you are making your lesson more memorable for them and something they will remember for a lifetime. So, with this, we have achieved our fifth objective, which is to design a story based lesson plan that enhances the retention of key historical events. Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Miss Rossi, that you get students to dress up like characters. If we're talking about the primary grade, yes, it excites them a lot to dress up like characters, to enact them. So, very true. Children love to use their imagination, and as teachers, as educators, why not use this ability that they have to our advantage? Use their ability to imagine, to create, to visualize, and help them remember something which can be as boring and dull and dry. Make it interesting for them, make it fun for them to learn. So now so with this, we have achieved our 5 objectives for this masterclass, which is to explain the significance of storytelling in making history engaging and memorable, to identify how the brain processes stories and how they aid in retention, to examine storytelling as a method of differentiation in the classroom, to examine the different AI tools that help create immersive stories in history, and finally, to design a storytelling based lesson plan that enhances the retention of key historical events. Now that we have understood and achieved our 5 objectives, let's have a quick assessment for learning. I would like you to use the chat box and quickly answer the questions that you see on the screen. Yes, Miss Catherine, I will definitely share the AI tools once again with you. So if you wanted to make a historical lesson more memorable, what storytelling technique would be most effective? Would you just present the facts without any context? Would you use a character driven narrative to create an emotional connection? Would you list down events in a bullet point? Or would you avoid that emotional engagement with the students? So we all agree that using a character driven narrative will help students connect with that event, will help draw an emotional connect with that event. Now, the next one, why do people remember stories better than plain facts? The first option is stories engage multiple areas of the brain, including emotions and senses. The second one, the brain prefers numbers over narratives. The third option, stories are always shorter than facts. And the fourth option, memory is only linked to repetition, not to storytelling. So most of you all agree with the first one. It engages multiple areas of the brain, including emotions and senses. And now for our third question. Why does storytelling encourage critical thinking in history? Is it because it presents only one viewpoint? Is it because it allows learners to analyze different perspectives and causes of events? Is it because it removes the need for historical evidence? Or does it because it focuses only on fictional elements? Oh, superb. So we all agree that storytelling helps us to understand a historical event from different perspectives, as well as the causes of the events. So I think today's masterclass may be called a success because we have understood the key terms. Now, a few frequently asked questions that come up based on this topic. How can storytelling develop students' critical thinking skills in history? Storytelling fosters critical thinking. How? Because you can, like I said before, use the same story or the same event and narrate it from different perspectives. So let's say, for example, if you're talking about, I'll take, for example, the partition of India. You can narrate it from the perspective of the British colonizers. You can narrate it from the perspective of a political leader who was jailed. You could also narrate it from the point of view of those who were displaced because of the partition. So that way, children are able to analyze different perspectives. They're able to understand what exactly happened and synthesize this information to draw their own conclusions. How does storytelling support students with different learning abilities? Like we all agreed that storytelling caters to different types of learners. It makes historical content accessible and engaging for all learners. You can modify, tweak your story based on the level of your learners in the classroom. Even if you have an EA learner, use storytelling through a visual means to help your student understand that better. Let your student retell the story in her own words or his own words. Can storytelling be used for assessment in history? Yes, you can use it, and I would promote it as well. Allow your students to retell or to explain their understanding of a historical event through a role play, through a narrative, through a comic strip, through a podcast. Let them rewrite a historical event from a different perspective altogether. This way, you are testing their ability to understand multiple viewpoints. Can I solely depend on storytelling in teaching a topic? What do you feel? Can you depend on only storytelling? What do you feel? Please write it in the chat box. Okay, Miss Dina says yes. Miss Nelzita says yes. Miss Shilpa says no. Miss Jyoti says no. If you all are saying no, if you all are saying yes, why so? Please tell me why. Remember, it's always good to ask your students the why question. Why did you say so? What makes you think that? Different ways to show different topics, okay? Storytelling needs to be supplemented with questioning. Absolutely right, Shilpa. Yes, but it depends on grades. Absolutely. Yes, it will depend on grades. They can illustrate good insight through their actions and dialogues, okay? Now we all know, we all are educators in the classroom. We all know that not every student is the same. We cannot use a one size fits all approach. So if you are thinking of depending solely on storytelling to teach your lesson in history, that's something I wouldn't recommend because not all students may like to hear stories. Some of them may benefit most from discussions. Some of them may benefit mostly from hands on activities. So, have an integrated approach when you're teaching a topic in history. That way, you are catering to the different learning styles in your classroom. So, our key takeaways from today's class is that storytelling transforms history lessons into engaging and memorable experiences by making events relatable and emotionally compelling. Our brain is wired for stories. If you remember, the earliest form of communication I'm talking about back in the Stone Age. What was it? It was storytelling. And that's how our ancestors as well has also shared. tips about our culture, has also narrated stories about how life was. All this was through storytelling. So our human brain is wired for stories. And by using the narrative technique, you can enhance student comprehension, retention, and critical thinking in social studies. A lot of AI tools and digital platforms can be integrated into lesson plans to create immersive, differentiated storytelling experiences that bring historical events to life. That reminds me, one of our audiences had asked me to share which AI tools can we use in creating stories. So, moving back, so here are a few tools. You can use Pixton, you can use Canva Storyboard, you can use Animato, you can use Powtoon, you can use ChatGPT, and you can use Scratch. Now, most of the students are already acquainted with these online resources. So allow them, give them the freedom to use these online tools to recreate a historical event. They will love it. That's because they are taking accountability for their own learning and also at the same time expressing their understanding of the event. Now I open the forum to all of you. Are there any questions you would like to ask? Is there any feedback you would like to give? Ms. Jyoti, is there any part you would like me to repeat? Yes, I will show it to you once more. So we have Pixton and Canva. We have Animato and Powtoon. We have ChatGPT and we have Scratch. I hope this helps you, Ms. Jyoti. If you have any questions, if you would like to share any feedback, please feel free to use the chat box. These are some of the works that I have referred to while researching about my topic. As teachers, we are lifelong learners. And it's important for us to stay updated with the latest strategies, the innovations in our field, to provide the best learning experience to our students. So, stay updated with ITU on Instagram, where teachers are offered amazing courses to improve your skills and be equipped with the latest trends in our field. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining today's class, for taking time out and joining today's class. As we step out of today's masterclass, remember, history isn't just about dates and events. It's about stories. Stories to ignite curiosity, to foster empathy, and inspire change. Let's go on to make history come alive to our students, to make it more memorable, to make it fun for our learners. Let's make history the best subject for them to learn with one story at a time. Thank you once again.